there and welcome to HerthaMari. I will be showing you how I try and make a blouse using the Simplicity Easy to Sew pattern. 1 out of 6 patterns guided me through to making my blouse, and I unfortunately do not know how old this pattern is. More details to it is listed down below. I just know that this pattern is one of the ones that, or at least this package is one of the ones where my mum made me a pair of trousers out of it when I was about 12, or no, it was 14. So it did bring about a bit of memories when I opened that up and realized where she got the pattern from. Because I had never made a clothing piece using a pattern, or at least never successfully made a clothing piece using a pattern, I thought it might be a clever idea to actually try and read the instructions and follow them one by one. So laying out the pattern so I can cut them all according to the size that the pattern says I was. These measurements I had actually already done before, a few days before, and they are then read at the back of the package. There's a guide to tell me which size this pattern will be for me. And then as soon as I figured out where I'm cutting which, I directly went into cutting, so I didn't have to waste any time. Once all the big parts were cut, I could finally rest my knees by sitting down on the couch and cut all the smaller parts, the interfacing, I think it's called, and I found a lovely little surprise as I was able to read a little bit more intent. Apparently every single pattern was made out of recycled paper, which was for me a very, very good thing, seeing as this pattern was quite old, and it means that they've already started their change quite some time ago. On to placing the pattern. So once again, studying that little guide as if my life depended on it, I placed the patterns on the grain as how they wanted it to be, and now the tricky part was basically to have it fit my pillows or the pillowcases. In Germany we have an 80 by 80 meter or 80 by 80 centimeter pillowcase, so that is quite nice, that one has a bit more fabric. However, this was still not sufficient to cut both sides of the blouse. I initially tried to just use the other pillowcase. I do think, however, that was also a little bit too small, and I ended up using another piece of fabric of the same set. So it must have been either a duvet cover or a bedspread, a bed sheet, and I was able to put the fabric a little bit in a different way in order to get everything on there. Another thing they do say is quite important, and I actually think I forgot to do it in the beginning, is to iron the pattern. So as soon as I realized I either missed the step or that is actually something that one must do there, I just decided to stay on the floor instead of having to move around and open up the iron board. It also did function quite well, and I don't think I had any problems with getting the pattern and the fabric straight to be able to work easier. And then on to the fun part, sticking pins into your fingers, into the pattern. Yeah, obviously you have to get the pattern attached to the fabric before you cut it, and the way my mom trained me was to use pins. I am one of those lucky types that are really clumsy and when it comes to sharp things, and I would like to actually put the disclaimer in now as well. Please be careful when you are using pins and scissors and everything like that for sewing and crafting and so on. But yeah, so we then put pins all over the pattern and then start cutting along the pattern. The only thing to note here is they do ask that you leave a little bit of an allowance in order for you to have a seam on every single part, and rather cut a little bit too big than cutting too small and the piece of fabric to be a waste. The next step is then to draw the pattern on your fabric. My lovely partner had a few pencils in his drawer, and or at least sewing pencils or fabric marker pencils, and I was then able to look for the one which fit the best to my fabric, and luckily there was a blue one, not just the white ones, because obviously the white on white would be a little bit harder. The instructions then told me basically to mark out the pattern onto the fabric, and also taking notes of the indents and everything like that. I have no idea what those indents mean, and I just did it as per the instructions. I think it's something to do with once you put the pattern together, you have to kind of like match the little indents or something like that. I thought it was important, I just kept it there. And once I was done with all the sides and the little indents, I then just remarked the number of the pattern part that I was doing, just in case I needed to be aware of that later on. I don't believe I did, because I did try and keep the actual pattern pieces with the pieces I was using for as long as possible, only putting the actual pattern away once most of the things were already stitched up. So one thing I did not think about when I initially marked my fabric was that it probably had to be done on the other side, because, well, I'm not going to be sewing them as is, and I had to take everything off again and move the pattern over to the other side and also draw on the other side then. Here I am putting the little stitches in for the boobies area, and I realized that I do not have a photo or a video of the previous step, which was basically putting in a seam, or at least stitching into the neckline. This they say is in order for one to not have the fabric actually move in different ways, move in a different way while stitching, so that you don't have a skew project. And I did think I had a recording of it, but I believe my battery maybe had died while I was doing that recording. So yeah, with regard to these parts that I'm making now, I have no idea what I call them again. These are one of the things, for example, where I am just absolutely a novice, and even though I have seen my mum make it multiple times, I know it should be there because it actually helps with how the shirt fits, and everything like that, but I cannot remember any of these details, like what is the name and so on. When it comes to sewing, they also say it should be a light straight stitch, so not too tight, and do not double stitch, just keep it where it is, and just before you finish, stop and just tie little end piece in a knot. Apparently this will make the fabric not stand too pointy once you have it on. We can then sew the shoulders and start pinning the body of the blouse. If you do have slits on your blouse like I do, remember to actually not sew them in. Then once it's all pinned, head over to the sewing machine and complete the easiest part of the shirt. And on to the interfacing. Okay, so the first time I tried it without pins, second time worked better with pins, and I continued using this method. It is the first time I'd actually worked with interfacing, so I'm probably doing things wrong here. But yeah, I think it did get what it was supposed to do. Once you've cut everything onto size, then you move on to the ironing. This you have to do with a cloth over the piece in order for the interfacing not to burn or stick to your iron. So after that you can pop it through the sewing machine on the edges that will be connected, so where your shoulders would also be or where your underarms would be. I did this in bulk, so as I was finished with one I did the other, and then study the manual. How many times I referred to this and I still did this wrong. So pin the inner parts of the interfacing so that it can be nice and neat on the inside too. This one I would advise to make little darts, cut little darts out there, little triangles, so that as you can see where the fold would have been, that doesn't scrunch up like it did with me. I did do that technique on my on the shoulder parts, however on the neckline I did not, and as you can see here it looks a little awkward and it becomes also bunchy and a little bit big. Once done, cut off the trim or the larger part, as you had quite a big seam allowance, and that counts for outside as well as the inner part, so just making it a little bit shorter, a little bit neater. Once you've done that, you can make little darts in the neckline and, well, shoulders later on. This will just make sure that the curve is quite neat and tidy. If you don't do this, then you won't be able to properly turn the fabric and it'll be uncomfortable to wear. Then you can insert the interfacing onto the inside where the connection of the fabrics are. Make sure that little piece is on the inside of your garment so that people are fooled and they do not realize that you have interfacing, even though they can see it through your white shirt. I did enjoy pinning this actually, however I do feel like the interfacing part was not my strong point, and that it it's either the fabric or it's just really not my style to have interfacing on my garments. Once completed that with your shoulders too, check your progress. See, it looks nice and neat. Yay! And flip it all inside out again so that you can actually get back to work. The next step for me was to pin the slits at the bottom of the blouse. So this helped, of course, with the fact that I have a little bit of a behind. So yeah, and if you pin it quite nicely and neatly, once you get to the sewing machine, it's all just a whiz and really fun actually. Then I did make the seam allowance a little bit shorter when I was doing the arms, the interfacing for the arms. Initially I thought that was a bad step because I had quite a small bit of fabric to work with, but once I actually did this whole part, I was like, oh no, it works quite nicely. Little side note, when one does these ones, or when I did this, I noticed that you have to give a little bit of an extra reinforcement on the part where it actually splits. So I would say to do a slit in one movement, so take it through and then double thingy it. We are in the final stretch. Yay! So I pin the middle part in order for the sides to not wiggle out of my grip as I was trying to pin them down. And yeah, so I pinned the middle, then one side and then the other side, and moved it to the sewing machine. Then on to the final part. Yes, you heard me right, it's almost done. The final part, ironing. So I do think I needed to iron a little bit more than I did throughout the project. However, it's okay. I ironed the interfacing, then of course the rest of the blouse, and also turned it around and ironed on the outside of the blouse, as I felt this fabric was just taking forever to actually get like straight and neat. And here's my final project. What do you think? I do think I will be making some alterations.